Imagine holding in your mind the power to end a world war, and at the same time, the power to end the world itself. This is the paradox of J. Robert Oppenheimer, a man of brilliance and fragility, a man who read Sanskrit poetry and split atoms in the same breath, a man who gave humanity the most powerful weapon ever created, then spent the rest of his life haunted by it. He was celebrated as a savior, then discarded as a traitor. He was quoted in headlines, then silenced in shame. His story is not just about science or war. It's about the cost of genius, the danger of unchecked ambition, and the unbearable weight of regret. This is not the tale of a hero or a villain. It is the warning of a man who opened the gates of the atomic age and discovered, too late, that some doors can never be closed. Welcome back. Today is not just another story. Today, you will hear about a man who changed the world forever. His story is powerful, frightening, and unforgettable. It is not a movie. It is not fiction. It is real. This is the story of a man who opened the secrets of the universe, but spent his life regretting it. His invention ended a world war, but it also created fear, pain, and questions that still haunt humanity today. He once whispered the words, "I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." His brilliant mind created the atomic bomb, but his soul was broken by it. His name was J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb. Why should you listen to this story? Because it is not only about history. It is about human choices. It is about dreams, fears, ambition, and regret. It shows how intelligence without wisdom can bring destruction instead of peace. One decision can change the fate of the planet. As you hear this story, you will feel emotions, shock, sadness, inspiration. At the same time, you will learn English through one of the most unforgettable stories in human history. So sit back, focus, and prepare yourself for the story of the man who created fire and hell on Earth. We begin with his childhood, the silent genius, the boy who saw the universe differently. Who exactly was Robert Oppenheimer? Robert was born on April 22, 1904, in New York City. His family lived in a large apartment on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He was born into comfort, wealth, and culture, but his childhood was far from ordinary. His father, Julius Oppenheimer, was a German immigrant who became a successful textile importer. His mother, Ella Friedman, was a painter who loved art. They were respected in society, not religious but very educated. From the outside, Robert's life looked perfect. He had a beautiful home, fine food, and loving parents. He had everything a child could want. But inside Robert, something was different. His mind was not like other boys his age. His thoughts belonged to another world. While other children played outside, Robert stayed inside, surrounded by books. He cared little for toys or games. Instead, he was fascinated by rocks, stars, atoms, and invisible forces of nature. His heart belonged to science, even as a child. At only 5 years old, he read science books written for adults. By 9, he was studying minerals and chemistry. At 12, he wrote letters to professional scientists who were shocked by his knowledge. His teachers said his mind was extraordinary. But his classmates did not understand him. He was awkward, quiet, and often lonely. He spoke in long, complicated sentences that confused children his age. He was sometimes bullied, yet Robert never stopped learning and never stopped exploring with his imagination. He often walked alone in the park, staring at the sky and wondering about the universe. While other children thought about toys, Robert thought about atoms, the building blocks of life. He was not only a boy, he was a storm waiting to happen. His hunger for learning was endless. He collected minerals and studied their structures. He loved poetry and art almost as much as science. He saw beauty in equations, and he felt nature spoke to him in a language only he could hear. His parents noticed his unusual brilliance and supported his education. They bought him books, instruments, and anything that could feed his mind. Robert grew in a house filled with art, books, and music. But he often preferred silence and thinking to company. By the time Robert entered Harvard University, he was only 18 years old, but he was already far ahead of most of his professors. The shy boy who once felt lonely was now on the path to becoming one of history's greatest thinkers. At Harvard, Robert did not limit himself to science. He read literature, studied philosophy, learned languages, and explored art. His mind was wide, curious, and restless. He wanted to know everything. But behind his brilliance, he also carried loneliness and fragility. This was the beginning of Oppenheimer's journey, the journey of a child born into comfort, shaped by books, and driven by a hunger for knowledge so strong that it made him different from everyone around him. A journey that would later change the entire world.
At Harvard, Robert studied many subjects. He was curious about everything. He did not only study physics and chemistry, but also philosophy, literature, art, Greek, and even the old language Sanskrit. He was more than a scientist. He was also a poet, thinker, and dreamer. But even with all this talent, Robert often felt sad and heavy inside. He suffered from depression and sometimes broke down. He felt different from the people around him. His emotions were deep, and often he felt like he did not belong in this world. When he moved to Cambridge, England, to study further, things grew worse. He became restless and unstable. At one point, in his frustration, he even tried to hurt his professor. He was stopped, but it showed how troubled and dangerous his mind could be. Robert's mind was like fire. It gave light, but it could also burn. He was not only a genius, but also a man with many personal struggles. His great gift was also his greatest challenge. He lived in two worlds, brilliance and pain. Later, Robert went to Germany, where he studied with some of the greatest scientists in the world. He learned from Max Born and Werner Heisenberg. These men were leaders in physics, and Robert absorbed everything. This was the moment that shaped his career. In Germany, Robert discovered something new and exciting: quantum physics. It explained the strange, invisible world hidden below what we see. Tiny particles moving in unexpected ways, following rules no one fully understood. It was mysterious and beautiful, and Robert was deeply fascinated by it. He was not just learning facts, he was dreaming about possibilities. He wondered what humans could do if they controlled atoms, the smallest parts of life. He saw atoms as keys that might open the door to new worlds of energy and power. By the time Robert came back to the United States in the 1930s, he was already respected as one of the brightest young physicists. He became a teacher at the University of California, Berkeley, and also at the California Institute of Technology, known as Caltech. Robert's classes were full of life. He did not teach only equations and numbers. He mixed science with poetry and philosophy. He inspired his students to think bigger. Many called him a genius. His words made them believe science was more than just study. But even with his success, Robert carried an inner storm. No one, not even himself, could see what was coming next. He could not imagine how his dreams about atoms would one day change the world forever in ways too heavy to bear. Across the ocean, dark clouds were already forming. In Germany, Adolf Hitler had risen to power. His Nazi party brought fear and violence. The world once again moved toward war, and soon science and war would be tied together in the most dangerous way. In 1938, German scientists made a discovery that changed everything. They split the uranium atom and released an incredible amount of energy. This process, called nuclear fission, proved it was possible to build a weapon far stronger than anything before. The world trembled. The idea was terrifying. If the Nazis built such a bomb first, they could rule the world by fear. Entire cities could be destroyed in a single strike. America was shocked. Leaders quickly realized they had to act before it was too late. The U.S. government started a secret mission. It was called the Manhattan Project. Its goal was simple in words, but nearly impossible in practice: build the atomic bomb before Germany could. But for this, they needed a leader, someone brilliant, someone with vision. They searched for the right man and found Robert Oppenheimer. He was chosen not only for his intelligence, but also for his ability to inspire others. He could understand science deeply, and at the same time, he could guide people with passion and imagination. For Robert, this was not just another job. It was a mission that would decide the future of humanity. But there was one huge problem. No one had ever built such a bomb before. There were no books, no maps, no second chances. Everything had to be invented from nothing. They needed scientists, laboratories, machines, houses, and supplies. All of this had to be built in silence and secrecy. The whole project was hidden from the outside world. Nothing could be spoken, not even to family. Robert made a bold choice. He said they must move far away from busy cities. He chose a dry desert in New Mexico called Los Alamos. It was surrounded by mountains and empty roads. There were no reporters or curious neighbors to ask questions. This lonely desert became their secret world. Scientists, soldiers, and families would all live there. It was quiet and hidden, the perfect place to work on the most dangerous project in history. Soon, Los Alamos would become the center of the atomic age.
The desert was empty, silent, and far from cities. It was the perfect place for a secret mission. In 1943, Robert Oppenheimer and a small group of top scientists moved there. This lonely place became Los Alamos, a hidden city built for war. At first, there was nothing but dust, rocks, and dry air. Soon, workers built houses, schools, and laboratories. Fences surrounded the land. Soldiers guarded every road. In a short time, the desert was transformed into a busy town filled with secrets. Life in Los Alamos was strange and strict. Families lived close together, but no one was allowed to share what they were working on. Letters sent home were checked. Phone calls were listened to. Privacy did not exist in this town. Even workers were given numbers instead of names. If someone asked what they were doing, the answer was always the same: "We are doing government research." In truth, they were building the most powerful weapon ever imagined, a bomb that could end cities. Oppenheimer invited the best minds in science to join him. Enrico Fermi, who built the first nuclear reactor, came. Niels Bohr, the Danish master of quantum theory, gave advice. Richard Feynman, a young genius, added energy. Edward Teller, later known for the hydrogen bomb, worked too. Soon, more than 6,000 people were part of Los Alamos. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, cooks, janitors, and even children lived in the town. Wives created homes, children played in the dirt, and workers labored daily.
Yet no one outside knew the real purpose. At the center of everything was Oppenheimer. He had never led a project this large before. He was a teacher, not a commander. Yet somehow he managed thousands of people. His secret was not just knowledge. His secret was inspiration and vision. Oppenheimer was not only a scientist, he was also a philosopher and poet. He often walked into laboratories wearing a black hat and smoking his pipe. He spoke with passion, mixing science with poetry, numbers with philosophy, formulas with meaning. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita, Shakespeare, and even Einstein. He did not speak only about equations. He spoke about humanity, about what the bomb would mean for the future. His words made others feel they were not only working, but shaping history. Even the military leaders respected him. He was thin, quiet, and unusual, but his voice carried weight. They began calling him the father of the bomb. Everyone in Los Alamos, scientists, soldiers, and workers, looked to him for guidance and leadership. The laboratories were always alive with activity. People worked day and night, rarely resting. He pushed them harder and harder because he believed Germany was close to building their own bomb. Every day lost felt dangerous. Every second mattered in this secret race. The scientists worked endlessly. They split atoms, measured reactions, and designed the core of the bomb. They tried to make it small enough to drop from a plane, but powerful enough to destroy an entire city. It was the most difficult challenge in history. They had no computers. They worked with chalkboards, pencils, and notebooks. Every number was written by hand. Every calculation was checked again and again. Even a single mistake could mean disaster. The pressure on their shoulders was heavy, almost unbearable. New machines had to be invented. New materials had to be created. Problems no one had ever faced had to be solved. The danger was always present. One wrong move could mean death for the scientists working so close to radioactive materials. Life for families was also unusual. Husbands could not tell their wives what they were building. Wives could not share their worries. Children played near buildings holding deadly materials, unaware of the danger. It was a strange and risky life in Los Alamos. The secrecy was extreme. Every scientist needed security clearance. Even a small connection to communism in the past could destroy a career. FBI agents watched everyone closely. They read letters, checked friendships, and asked questions. Suspicion hung in the air every day. Fear was common, but so was determination. Oppenheimer inspired the team to keep moving forward. He reminded them of the war still burning in Europe. Hitler was still a threat. They believed their work could save the world, even if it terrified them. And so, in the quiet desert of New Mexico, thousands of people lived double lives. On the surface, they were workers, parents, and neighbors. But behind the fences, they were building a weapon that would change the course of human history forever.
The government feared spies, and for good reason. Later, it was discovered that Soviet agents had entered the Manhattan Project and passed secrets to their country. But in 1944 and 1945, the scientists did not know. They only knew the bomb must be finished first. As the project grew closer to success, fear spread inside the minds of the scientists. They were not only excited anymore. They began to worry about what they were building. Could it be too powerful? Could it destroy more than they imagined? Some asked a terrible question. What if this bomb starts a chain reaction and burns the Earth's atmosphere? The idea sounded impossible, but still it lived in their minds. The truth was, no one knew for sure what would happen.
Oppenheimer felt the same fears. He often could not sleep. At night, he walked alone in the desert, staring at the stars. To a colleague, he whispered, "In some strange way, I feel like I have already died. The world may never forgive us." Still, he kept moving forward. He told himself that if America did not build the bomb, then Hitler might. Someone else would do it. The thought brought him no comfort, but it gave him reason to keep going despite his fears. By 1945, the bomb was nearly finished. All that was left was to test it. The location was chosen, Jornada del Muerto, a desert in New Mexico. Its name meant Journey of the Dead Man. The place was silent, dry, and perfect for an explosion. The test was called Trinity. A bomb was lifted onto a steel tower 100 feet tall. Scientists built bunkers miles away for safety. Cameras were prepared. Instruments were set. Soldiers were warned. The world's first atomic test was ready. On July 15th, the night before the test, silence covered the desert. At Los Alamos, no one slept. Some scientists checked their numbers one last time. Others sat in bunkers staring at the sky, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Even Oppenheimer, usually full of words, was quiet. He stood with his hands in his pockets, looking at the tower. On top of it rested the bomb, a sphere of metal and power, waiting like a new sun ready to be born. The scientists had done their best, but they still had no answers. Some feared the blast would ignite the sky and destroy the planet. Others feared the test would fail completely. Most feared the truth of what would happen if it worked. The test was planned for 4 a.m., but a storm rolled across the desert. Rain, wind, and lightning delayed the countdown. The storm passed, and Oppenheimer stood on a metal platform 10 miles away, his eyes fixed on the bomb tower. Later, he said that in those moments, he remembered words from the ancient Hindu book, the Bhagavad Gita. If the radiance of 1,000 suns were to burst into the sky, it would be like the splendor of the Mighty One. At exactly 5:29 a.m. on July 16, 1945, the desert lit up. First, there was silence. Then came a flash brighter than anything ever seen before. The sky turned white with a light beyond imagination. Men covered their eyes and gasped. The flash was followed by fire. A great ball of heat and flame rose into the air. It grew into a shining sphere, climbing higher and higher. The desert shook. The fire spread colors of orange, red, and purple across the sky. Then came the shock wave. It struck the earth like thunder, tearing the world apart. Buildings shook, windows cracked. Soldiers miles away felt the force push against their bodies. Sand melted into glass. A mushroom-shaped cloud climbed miles into the air. The men who watched were frozen. Some shouted with joy. Some cried. Some fell silent, unable to speak. They had worked for years for this moment. Now it was real. The bomb worked. The power of the atom had been released. Oppenheimer said almost nothing. He whispered only one line. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." The words came from the Bhagavad Gita. For him, it was the moment a warrior accepts his duty, even if it brings destruction. Afterward, the scientists reacted in different ways. Some cheered because their hard work had succeeded. Others felt fear, realizing this was not just science, it was a new age. An age where humans could destroy themselves with a single weapon. One scientist, Kenneth Bainbridge, turned to Oppenheimer and said, "Now "We are all sons of bitches." It was meant as a joke, but it carried truth. They had done something that could never be undone. They had created a new kind of hell. As the mushroom cloud rose over the Jornada del Muerto desert, Oppenheimer stood in silence. His body was still, but inside his mind he carried the weight of history. He knew the world had changed forever, and there was no turning back.
The light was so bright that men could see the bones inside their hands through their skin. It was so bright that night turned into day. The desert glowed as if the sun itself had exploded on Earth. Then came the fireball. It rose into the sky, a giant sphere of heat, color, and death. Orange and red flames spread upward, burning everything near. The fireball grew larger and larger, climbing higher as the desert shook with force. Next came the sound. The shockwave roared across the land, like the sky itself was tearing apart. Buildings trembled, windows shattered, sand melted into glass. A mushroom-shaped cloud rose more than 7 miles high, towering above everything, announcing a new age. The scientists were frozen in silence. Some cheered in excitement, their years of work finally complete. Others cried, realizing what they had done. A few fell to the ground in shock. They had created power too great to fully understand. But Oppenheimer did not cheer. He whispered quietly to himself, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." These words came from the Bhagavad Gita, an ancient Hindi scripture he had studied. For him, it was deeply personal and full of meaning. In that scripture, a warrior accepts his duty to fight, even if it means destruction. Oppenheimer felt the same. He was no longer just a scientist or a teacher. He was a man who had opened the gates of destruction forever. Some scientists felt proud. They had solved problems that once seemed impossible. They had done what no one else could. But others felt horror. They realized this was not simply a weapon. This was the beginning of a new age, an age of nuclear fear. One scientist, Kenneth Bainbridge, turned to Oppenheimer after the test and said, "Now we are all sons of bitches." He spoke half as a joke, but behind his words was truth. What they had created could never be undone or forgotten. As the desert of New Mexico still echoed with the power of Trinity, across the ocean the war continued. Germany had surrendered in May 1945, but Japan was still fighting. The question came quickly: should the bomb be used on people? The United States government debated. Some wanted to warn Japan, to show them the power of the bomb and ask for surrender. Others believed only real use would end the war. The decision was no longer in Oppenheimer's hands. It belonged to leaders. Still, he was asked to speak in Washington to President Truman's advisors. Oppenheimer did not refuse. In fact, he argued that maybe using the bomb once, just once, might save lives. It could end the war quickly and prevent more long battles. He admitted, "In some ways we feel we already have blood on our hands. But we also feel that if we do not use it, the war might continue and kill millions more." It was a difficult, painful choice. But Oppenheimer, like many others, underestimated the power of what they had created. Nobody truly understood what the bomb would do to cities, to children, to entire populations. They thought of strategy, but not of the deep human cost waiting ahead. On August 6, 1945,
At 8:15 in the morning, a U.S. plane named the Enola Gay flew over Hiroshima. From its belly, it released the first atomic bomb ever used in war. In seconds, the city was burning. The blast killed about 80,000 people instantly. Buildings vanished. Streets melted into fire. Thousands more were blinded, burned, or crushed under fallen walls. The city that had lived for centuries was turned into smoke and ashes in only minutes. 3 days later, on August 9th, another plane dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki. This time, another 40,000 people died in moments. Entire families disappeared. Survivors carried burns, wounds, and deep scars that would never heal. But death did not end with the blast. Many who survived the explosions later suffered from radiation sickness. Hair fell out, skin peeled, fevers rose. Cancers appeared years later. The bombs did not only kill quickly, they also poisoned life for generations. The atomic bomb had ended the war, but it had also opened a new door, a door into fear, pain, and power no one could fully control. Oppenheimer and his team had changed the world forever, but at a cost too high to measure.
Oppenheimer did not drop the bomb, but he had built it. When he heard about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, something inside him broke. He realized the war was ending, but also that science had crossed a line it could never return from. A few weeks later, Oppenheimer was invited to meet President Harry Truman at the White House. He walked in thin, tired, and deeply shaken. Truman smiled proudly because the war was over, but Oppenheimer's face showed only sorrow and regret. He looked down and said softly, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman was shocked. Later, Truman told his aides, "I never want to see that crybaby in my office again." From that day, Oppenheimer understood the truth. The government no longer needed him. Worse, they no longer trusted him. The man who had led the project that ended the war was now seen as a possible problem and even a threat. Meanwhile, the world celebrated. In August 1945, after the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, World War II officially ended. America became the most powerful country on Earth because of the atomic bomb. Newspapers praised Oppenheimer as a hero, a genius, and a savior. But inside his heart, there was only silence. He did not want medals or parades. He did not want thanks. All he could see were the photographs of burned bodies, destroyed cities, and children screaming in pain. His invention worked too well. When Oppenheimer returned to Los Alamos, he was not the same man. He avoided people. He spoke less. He grew thinner and weaker. He was haunted by one terrible question that repeated in his mind. What have I done? At night, he had terrible dreams. He woke up sweating, imagining bombs falling from the sky. Sometimes he sat quietly at the window for hours, staring outside without speaking. He knew the war was over, but the cost felt unbearable. He once said, "In some crude sense, which no words can describe, the physicists have known sin, and this is knowledge we cannot lose." For him, science had become more than numbers. It had become a spiritual weight, a heavy pain. Instead of continuing to design bigger bombs, Oppenheimer began doing something surprising. He started to speak against nuclear weapons. He gave public talks. He wrote letters. He warned politicians about the dangers of building more bombs. He wanted to stop the destruction. He believed what happened in Japan must never happen again. He believed science should serve understanding and progress, not death and fear.
He told people that knowledge must have responsibility. Without it, the same power that created could also destroy. Oppenheimer even met with President Truman's advisors and asked them to support international control of nuclear weapons. He wanted a global agreement where no country would secretly build more bombs. He hoped for cooperation between nations to protect the world from another disaster. But his timing was poor. America was no longer only fighting wars with guns. A new kind of fear was spreading. In the late 1940s, tension began to rise between the United States and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was beginning. Oppenheimer never forgot the first reports from Japan. Newspapers spoke of Hiroshima as ruins, but the words were too small for the reality. Soon came the photographs, streets of ash, buildings flattened, children burned beyond recognition. Trinity had been fire in the desert, but this was fire in a living city. The bomb now had faces, names, and cries that could not be silenced. In Washington, generals celebrated victory, and politicians praised American power, but Oppenheimer spoke little. He sat quietly, his thin hands trembling as though still carrying the explosion. They saw weakness, but in truth he carried something they could not understand. The knowledge that mankind had crossed a line that could never be crossed back. His meeting with Truman broke what was left inside him. He whispered, "Mr. President, I feel I have blood on my hands." Truman dismissed him coldly, calling him a crybaby. That was the moment Oppenheimer realized his burden would never be shared. The nation would celebrate, but he would carry the guilt alone. Back at Los Alamos, he walked like a ghost. Some colleagues drowned their doubts in pride. Others whispered regrets but dared not speak aloud. At night, Oppenheimer suffered nightmares, flashes of light, cities on fire, shadows burned into walls. He woke up sweating, whispering verses from the Bhagavad Gita to calm himself. He tried to explain himself in letters and quiet talks. "In the debate on the bomb, there is no innocence," he said. To some, it was wisdom, but to others, it was weakness. But for him, it was simply the truth. The bomb was both a victory and a curse, and he had helped open the door to a future filled with fear. This was the beginning of his transformation. From celebrated genius to the man who would spend the rest of his life warning humanity about the danger he had helped create. The Soviet Union was rising fast. The United States had dropped the first atomic bombs. But the Soviets were working on their own. A new kind of war began. It was not fought with armies in battle, but with secrets, spies, and fear. This war was called the Cold War. It was not open fighting, but it was just as dangerous. Each side tried to outsmart the other. Each feared that one mistake could lead to disaster. It was a war of suspicion and power. America wanted to stay ahead. Leaders demanded more bombs, bigger bombs, stronger bombs. They wanted a new weapon called the hydrogen bomb. It was said to be 1,000 times more powerful than the one that destroyed Hiroshima. Leaders saw it as necessary. But Oppenheimer refused to join. He believed the hydrogen bomb was not just another weapon, but a tool for mass killing. He called it a weapon of genocide. He warned that it could start a race where countries kept building bombs endlessly. He believed such a race would end in disaster, where both sides would destroy each other. But his refusal made powerful people angry. They asked, "Why is Oppenheimer against the hydrogen bomb? Does he have something to hide? Can we really trust him?" They remembered his past. In the 1930s, Oppenheimer had gone to meetings with left-wing thinkers. His wife, Kitty, had been a member of the Communist Party. His brother Frank had been politically active. At that time, these things did not matter much. But now it was the Cold War, and suspicion was everywhere. The government feared Soviet spies. They feared communist influence. They even feared their own citizens. People were accused without proof. Careers were destroyed by rumors. Fear and paranoia ruled the nation. Oppenheimer's history became dangerous. His bravery in war was forgotten. His wisdom was ignored. The man who had once been trusted to lead the Manhattan Project was now treated as a possible traitor. The government began to look at him with suspicion. By 1954, everything came crashing down. Oppenheimer was called to a secret hearing by the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. They accused him of delaying the hydrogen bomb, of having communist ties, and of being a threat to national security. The trial was not fair. Oppenheimer was not allowed to bring his lawyer into the room. His private conversations were used against him. Old friends were forced to testify. Some defended him, but others betrayed him. The process was designed to break him. The hearing lasted for 4 long weeks. Day after day, Oppenheimer sat in the room listening to people question his loyalty. He was once the most respected scientist in America, but now he was treated like a criminal under interrogation. Every part of his life was open to attack. His friendships, his family, his old letters, even his personal beliefs were used against him. The man who had once been praised as a genius was now dragged through the mud. The decision came on June 29, 1954. The Atomic Energy Commission revoked his security clearance. That meant he could no longer see government secrets. He could no longer work on atomic projects. He was officially cut off from the world he helped build. It was a brutal fall from greatness. Oppenheimer was devastated, but he did not fight loudly. He did not scream. He did not protest in anger. He simply walked out quietly, carrying the pain inside. His silence showed the depth of his defeat. He returned to Princeton, where he taught classes and gave lectures. Students admired his brilliant mind, but he was not the same man. Something inside him had died. He had lost his power, his influence, and his place in America's future. The father of the atomic bomb was now an outcast. Once celebrated as a national hero, he was now treated as a possible traitor. The country he had served so loyally had turned its back, leaving him alone with regret and sorrow. Oppenheimer's downfall was not just political, it was deeply human. The 1954 hearing did not only strip him of security clearance, it stripped him of dignity. Friends who once praised him were forced to choose between loyalty and survival. Many chose silence. Others testified against him, some out of fear, some out of ambition. For Oppenheimer, each word spoken in that dark room felt like a knife from people he had once called his own. The irony was bitter. He had given America its most powerful weapon, yet America no longer trusted the very man who delivered it. In the years that followed, Oppenheimer became a man who lived in 2 worlds. Publicly, he lectured and wrote about science, philosophy, and ethics. Privately, he wrestled with the ghosts of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Students who met him in Princeton described him as gentle, brilliant, but often far away in thought, as if half of his mind still remained in the desert of New Mexico on that morning of July 16, 1945. He carried an invisible weight, one that no award or recognition could ever remove. His relationship with power had changed forever. Once,
Generals and presidents had listened carefully to his words. Now, even when he spoke, the government only listened out of courtesy. He often warned that the hydrogen bomb would not create peace, but fear. He argued that if nations competed endlessly in building larger weapons, the result would not be safety, but the possibility of annihilation. Yet his warnings fell on deaf ears. America and the Soviet Union raced forward, building stockpiles of weapons that could destroy the planet many times over. Oppenheimer's voice was like a candle in a storm, flickering but unheard.
The man who gave America the bomb, the man who helped win the war, was now treated as an enemy. Friends tried to stand by him, but the pain was too deep. Even his own family carried the sadness with them. His wife, Kitty, began to drink heavily. Their home life turned cold and distant. Oppenheimer once told a friend, "When you see something that is technically sweet, you go ahead and do it." That was what they had done. They had the theory, the tools, and the chance. So, they built the bomb. But afterward, they saw the results, and the weight of those results crushed them. They could never escape from what had been done. After losing his security clearance, Oppenheimer was no longer useful to the country he had served. He was not arrested, he was not sent to prison, but he was treated as if he no longer existed. He was cut off from everything. No more government meetings. No more invitations to important scientific gatherings. No more role in shaping the future of America. He had gone from being a national hero to being invisible in his own land. Oppenheimer moved with his family to a quiet home in Princeton, New Jersey. He lived there with his wife, Kitty, and their 2 children, Peter and Tony. But the house was not full of happiness. It was full of silence. He tried to continue his work. He wrote papers, gave lectures, and thought about science, philosophy, and humanity. But inside, he was breaking. His brilliant mind was now weighed down by doubts. He had given the world something that could end it. He spent long hours sitting by the window, staring at the trees moving in the wind. Sometimes he smoked his pipe and said nothing. His once powerful voice became quiet. His mind, that once glowed with ideas, now carried only regret. Oppenheimer's pain did not stay inside him. It spread through his family. Kitty grew bitter and angry. She believed the world had stolen her husband from her. She drank more and pushed people away, living in her own darkness. Their daughter Tony was intelligent like her father, but also fragile. She struggled with depression for years. Later in life, she ended her own life, a tragedy that broke the Oppenheimer family further apart. Their house grew heavier with sadness. Their son Peter also carried the weight of his father's silence. He lived his life quietly, avoiding the spotlight. He distanced himself from the world that had once celebrated his father. The family home was filled with books and regret. It was not a house of laughter or joy. It was a house of quiet pain. Every corner held memories, shadows, and unspoken feelings. The silence of Oppenheimer's mind reached everyone who lived under his roof. Even though the world turned its back on him, Oppenheimer never stopped thinking. He gave lectures at universities. He spoke not only about science, but about ethics. He warned about the danger of nuclear weapons. He begged people to listen and to act. But the world no longer listened.
His words no longer had the same power. The same people who once praised him now saw him as a man from the past, a man lost in his own mistakes and guilt. One newspaper wrote that he was the man who opened the door to the atomic age and then got lost in it. These words hurt deeply because they carried some truth. He had created power, but he could not control it. Oppenheimer often returned to the old scripture he had studied, the Bhagavad Gita. He quoted it again and again, the same book he had remembered after the Trinity test. Its lines spoke to him, gave him language for his endless regret. He once said, "In battle in the forest, at the cliff in the mountains, on the dark sea, in the middle of arrows and fear, in shame and confusion, the good deeds a man has done will defend him."
These were not just poetic words. They were the quiet prayers of a man trying to forgive himself. While Oppenheimer lived in silence, the world moved forward without him. The Soviet Union built its own atomic bomb, and the hydrogen bomb was born. This was the very bomb Oppenheimer had warned against, yet countries rushed to build it. America wanted more power. The Soviets wanted to catch up. Soon Britain, France, and others joined. The arms race had begun, and fear spread across the world. America became stronger, but also more afraid. Nuclear weapons were no longer a secret locked away in Los Alamos. They had become a normal part of politics. Weapons held like cards in a dangerous game of power between nations. Oppenheimer watched this unfold with sadness. He once said, "In trying to defend freedom, we may have created a world where fear rules more than freedom." The bomb that ended war now became a tool for threatening peace itself. He was more than a scientist. He was a philosopher, a thinker, a man who wanted to ask life's hardest questions. But modern science was changing. It was about speed, money, and control, not about wisdom, truth, or understanding. He told his students, "The physicists have known sin, and we must not forget that." These words were not for drama. They were warnings. He wanted young scientists to remember that knowledge without morality could bring destruction greater than creation. In later years, Oppenheimer often escaped to a small island called St. John in the Caribbean. There he found a little peace. He walked beaches, sat under palm trees, watched the endless sea, and thought in silence about everything he had seen. On the island, no one called him the destroyer of worlds. No one asked him about Hiroshima or security trials. He was just Robert, a quiet man with tired eyes, a brilliant mind, and a heavy heart carrying years of regret. He still gave a few lectures, but less and less. Each year he became thinner and weaker, as if the bomb's shadow never left him. In public, he was calm and polite, but behind his eyes lay storms no one else could see. Those eyes carried a lifetime of memory. He had seen the beginning of a new age, then watched it become a nightmare. He had given humanity the power of gods, but he himself paid the price of that terrible gift. He never begged for forgiveness. He never called himself a victim. But everyone who met him could feel the sorrow in his silence. Oppenheimer had become not just a man, but a symbol of genius and guilt, creation and destruction. He showed how far the human mind could rise and how deeply the human heart could fall. He proved that intelligence without wisdom is dangerous. He embodied both the glory of science and the tragedy of its misuse in human hands. By the early 1960s, Oppenheimer had grown quieter still. His body became thin and frail. He stopped traveling, rarely gave public speeches, and spent most days alone. He either stayed by the sea or sat in his study, surrounded by books. But another battle began inside him. In 1965, doctors diagnosed him with throat cancer. Years of smoking his pipe had finally caught him. The small habit that once gave him comfort now stole his strength, his voice, and his health. The illness spread quickly. He lost weight and could not eat without pain. Speaking became harder every week. The man whose words once shook the world was slowly losing the ability to speak at all. His famous voice was fading into silence. He tried radiation treatment and chemotherapy, but the cancer worsened. Most of his last months were spent at home in Princeton. His wife Kitty, doctors, and a few loyal friends cared for him. But he faced the illness with his usual quiet endurance. He did not complain. He did not shout at fate. He accepted the sickness just as he had accepted betrayal, shame, and regret. He carried it all with dignity, as if he knew this suffering was simply another part of his story. In private, he still read. His books were his last companions: philosophy, poetry, and of course, the Bhagavad Gita. Even as his body weakened, his mind returned to the same words he had quoted at Trinity. Those words never left him. Despite his isolation, Oppenheimer's mind never stopped searching for meaning. In the quiet evenings of Princeton, he often returned to poetry, philosophy, and the Bhagavad Gita. His students remembered that he would recite verses not as an academic exercise, but as a man pleading for answers. Sometimes he spoke about the nature of responsibility, whether scientists should be judged only by their discoveries or also by how those discoveries were used. In those reflections, he revealed not just guilt, but wisdom. He wanted the next generation to ask questions he and his peers had failed to ask in time. By the early 1960s, Oppenheimer was no longer the fiery young physicist who once inspired armies of scientists. He had become something else: a warning, a reminder that brilliance without caution can burn the very hands that hold it. When young physicists visited him, they did not just see a scientist, they saw a man marked by history. His thin frame, his quiet speech, and his haunted eyes all told the story more powerfully than any textbook. He was a living symbol of what it meant to unlock a force greater than humanity could control.
The same book that once gave him comfort during destruction now stayed close to him in his final years. When visitors came, Oppenheimer smiled politely. But behind that soft smile lived a man who had carried too much for too long. He had seen too much pain, lost too many friends, and lived with a burden heavier than anyone should. Each smile he gave was a mask. Behind it, his soul was still wrestling with fire he himself had released. In 1963, 2 years before doctors discovered his cancer, something unexpected happened. After nearly a decade of silence, the United States government decided to honor him with the Enrico Fermi Award, one of the highest scientific awards in the country. President Lyndon B. Johnson approved it. To the government, the medal was a way of saying, "We are sorry, we were wrong, you deserved better." But Oppenheimer knew it was not forgiveness, it was politics, and it was too late. Still, he accepted. He stood on stage, thin and pale in a black suit.
His soft smile hid his feelings. He gave a short, polite speech. He thanked them, but inside he knew nothing could replace what had been destroyed in him. By early 1967, the cancer spread quickly. He could no longer walk without help. His voice became weak, almost only a whisper. Kitty, his wife, rarely left his side. Friends and old students visited to say goodbye to their broken teacher. Some who came had once spoken against him during his security trial, but Oppenheimer never shouted at them. He never carried anger. He welcomed them with kindness, as if he no longer wanted to punish anyone, only to understand life's meaning. He whispered once to a friend, "When I look back, I see a chain of choices. Each one made sense at the time, but together they led to something I never chose." That was Oppenheimer, trapped in a legacy he could not control. On February 18, 1967, at the age of 62, J. Robert Oppenheimer died quietly at his home in Princeton. There were no loud headlines, no crowds, no sirens. Only silence followed the man who once brought fire down to earth. The man who shaped history left the world with forgotten memories, heavy questions, and quiet sorrow. No scientist had fallen so far from greatness. No genius had paid such a terrible price for doing what he believed was necessary. After his death, people began to rethink his legacy. Some called him a hero. Some called him a monster. Some saw him as a tragic figure. But most agreed on one thing. Oppenheimer's life was not just history, it was a warning. Today, his name lives in books, films, and classrooms, but it is remembered with a question, not with celebration. The question is simple. Just because we can do something, should we? That question follows every nuclear weapon still in existence. His life leaves us lessons that must never be forgotten. First, intelligence without conscience is dangerous. Oppenheimer was one of the smartest men alive, but even he admitted we did not think enough about the consequences. Being smart is not enough. Wisdom and kindness must guide knowledge. Without a heart, the human mind can create destruction instead of beauty. That is lesson 1. Lesson 2. Even the most powerful people feel regret. Oppenheimer built the bomb, but it gave him no peace. Fame is not peace. Power is not joy. Only a clear soul can bring true happiness. Lesson 3. Never give your whole self to a system that does not value you. Oppenheimer gave everything for his country, yet they betrayed him. Lesson 4. Silence is the loudest scream. Oppenheimer did not fight back with anger. He carried his truth in silence, and that silence spoke more than any words could. It became a symbol of what happens when knowledge goes too far. Lesson 5. What is created cannot be uncreated. The atomic bomb cannot be erased. Once a thing exists, it lives forever. So create carefully. Ask yourself each day, am I building something that helps humanity or something that will hurt it? Oppenheimer's story is not only a history lesson, it is a mirror held up to all of us. It shows how intelligence without morality can lead to ruin. It shows how one person can change the world and suffer for it. It shows how a soul can be brilliant and broken at the same time. We must never forget what he gave humanity, and we must never forget the price he paid. His life was both creation and destruction, forever joined together. If this story touched your heart, remember Oppenheimer. Remember what he built and what he lost. Do not just move on and forget. Carry the question he left behind. Should we always do what we are capable of doing? Because intelligence without compassion is dangerous. Knowledge without wisdom is empty. Power without humanity destroys. Oppenheimer's story reminds us to never let the mind run faster than the heart. It reminds us to build with care and to live with kindness.